The wind whipped against the hotel glass as I realized my own son had sent me here just to please his wealthy in-laws. I felt 58 years of sacrifice dissolve into the cold night air. Yet, exactly 1 hour later, those same people were on their knees begging for my forgiveness and demanding a divorce. They thought I was just a weak old woman, but they had no idea I held the secret that would shatter their perfect lives. My name is Evelyn Hart. At 58 years old, I carried the invisible weight of 3 decades spent scrubbing floors at Brighthaven Facility Services. My hands were rough maps of labor, the skin permanently dry from industrial cleaners and bleach. But tonight they trembled for a different reason entirely. I stood in the corridor of the Budget Inn, staring at the peeling wallpaper under the flickering yellow hum of the hallway lights. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap lemon polish. It was a scent that usually reminded me of work, of the long night shifts I pulled to put food on the table. But now it only smelled of abandonment. The radiator at the end of the hall hissed, a lonely sound that matched the hollow ache spreading through my chest. Just 2 hours ago, I was in my own living room. I was folding laundry, humming a quiet tune, thinking about what to cook for dinner. Then Marcus walked in. My son. The boy whose fevered forehead I used to cool with damp rags at 3 in the morning. The boy I had protected from the world with my own body. He did not look me in the eye. He looked at the floor, then at the wall. Anywhere but at the mother who had raised him alone since his father walked out. He held a hotel keycard in his hand, like it was a weapon he was afraid to use, but determined to fire anyway. The silence between us was thick, suffocating, broken only by the clock ticking on the wall. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be," he had said, his voice tight and strained. I remembered the way the air left my lungs. It was not a question. It was an eviction. His in-laws, the Monroes, were coming for the weekend. They needed space. They needed comfort. Apparently, my presence in my own home was an obstacle to that comfort. I tried to speak, to ask why I had to leave the house I paid for. But the words died in my throat. I did not want to cry in front of him. I refused to be the weeping, pathetic old woman he clearly expected me to be. I simply nodded, took the key, and packed a bag. Now, standing in this dim hallway, the silence was deafening. I thought about the years at Brighthaven. I remembered the nights I walked home in the snow because I wanted to save the bus fare for Marcus's school trips. I remembered eating toast for dinner so he could have the chicken. I remembered the nights I spent on my knees, scrubbing scuff marks off corporate lobby floors, my back screaming in agony, just so I could buy him the sneakers all the other kids had. I gave him every ounce of my strength, every dollar I earned, and every dream I ever had. I carved my life out so he could fill his, and in return, he had handed me a room key to a roadside motel because his wife's parents found my existence inconvenient. I swiped the card, and the lock clicked open with a hollow sound. The room was cold. I walked inside and set my small suitcase on the luggage rack. The furniture was chipped wood. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern that had not been in style for 20 years. I walked into the bathroom and gripped the edges of the sink. The harsh fluorescent light above the mirror buzzed angrily, casting long shadows over my face. I looked at the woman in the glass. I saw the grey hair I had stopped dyeing to save money. I saw the wrinkles etched by worry and exhaustion. But mostly, I saw a woman who had allowed herself to become invisible. I had raised a son who loved his status more than he loved his mother. The realization hit me harder than the winter wind outside. I was not just a guest in a hotel. I was an exile from my own life, pushed aside like broken furniture that no longer fit the decor. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and let my back slump against the headboard. The silence of the room felt heavy, almost suffocating, forcing my mind to drift back to a time when noise was the only constant in my life. I closed my eyes and saw the small, drafty apartment where Marcus and I lived after his father walked out. I was 25 then, terrified and broke, with a toddler clinging to my leg and a mountain of unpaid bills on the counter. That was when I started at Bright Haven Facility Services. I remembered the smell of industrial ammonia vividly. It was a sharp, stinging scent that seemed to seep into my pores and stay there for days. For nearly 30 years. I worked the night shift. I spent my life looking at the world from the floor up, scrubbing scuff marks left by expensive Italian leather shoes, emptying trash cans filled with the remnants of corporate lunches I could never afford. My hands became my history book. The skin cracked and bled in the winters because the harsh chemicals stripped away every bit of moisture. I used to wrap them in Vaseline and socks while I slept, just so I could hold a pen to sign Marcus's permission slips the next morning without wincing in pain. But it was worth it. Every cracked knuckle and aching muscle was worth it because of the boy waiting for me at home. Marcus was my son. He was so bright, so undeniably good. I remembered him at 7 years old, sitting at our chipped kitchen table, doing his homework with a seriousness that made my heart ache. He was not like other children who threw tantrums for toys. He saw things. He understood things he should not have had to understand. I recalled one evening when I came home with a fever, my face flushed and my body trembling from a flu I could not afford to rest through. I tried to stand at the stove to make soup, but my legs gave out. Marcus was there instantly. He dragged a chair over for me, his small face twisted in fear and determination. "Mum, please sit down." He had begged, his voice wobbling. "I can do it. I promise I can do it. When I grow up, I'm going to make so much money that you never have to work again." I had pulled him into my arms then, ignoring the heat radiating from my skin. He buried his face in my uniform, crying because he felt helpless, and I cried because I felt like the luckiest woman alive. I believed him. I believed that a heart that pure would grow into a man of honor. I thought my love was a shield that would protect him from becoming cruel. Then came Lydia Monroe. I remembered the first time Marcus brought her home. She was breathtaking, like a porcelain doll kept on a high shelf. She wore a cashmere coat that likely cost more than my car, and her hair was a cascade of perfect, golden waves. At first, I was relieved. I was happy that my son, the boy who wore second-hand coats, had found someone from a world of comfort. I thought she would bring him peace. I cooked my best pot roast that night, setting the table with the good plates I had saved for special occasions. But I missed the signs. I was too blinded by hope to see the subtle shift in the atmosphere. It started small. When Marcus introduced me, he did not wrap his arm around my shoulder like he usually did. He stood a foot away, closer to her. "This is my mother," he said, his tone flat, lacking the warmth I was used to. Lydia smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Her gaze swept over my small living room, lingering on the worn fabric of the sofa and the water stain on the ceiling. When she looked at me, I felt it. It was a look of polite tolerance, a veiled contempt that made me feel like I should apologize for existing. "It is nice to meet you," she said, pausing just long enough to make the greeting feel forced. As the weeks turned into months, the distance between my son and me grew into a chasm. He stopped coming over for Sunday dinners. When he did visit, he was critical. He commented on the clutter, the smell of my cooking, things he had never minded before. I tried to tell myself it was just the stress of a new relationship, but deep down, I knew better. The boy who once cried because I had to work while sick was disappearing, replaced by a stranger who looked at his mother and saw only a liability. I sat in that hotel room, staring at my rough hands, and realized that the son who promised to take care of me had been slowly trading his heart for a ticket into a world where I did not belong. The wedding was the first clear signal that I was losing my son to a world I could not afford to enter. It took place at a sprawling estate in Ridgeford Hills, a place where the driveways were longer than my entire street. I sat 4 rows back from the front, squeezed between a distant cousin of the Monroes and a floral arrangement that likely cost more than my monthly rent. I had drained my savings account to buy a decent dress, a navy blue piece that I thought looked elegant. But amidst the sea of designer silk and custom-tailored suits, I looked exactly like what I was the help. I watched Marcus standing at the altar, sweating in a tuxedo that cost $2,000, looking terrified and desperate to please. When he said his vows, he did not look at me once. Life in the Monroe family mansion was a performance, and Marcus was the understudy trying to learn his lines. I visited them 2 months after the ceremony. The house was a fortress of marble and glass, cold and imposing. It did not smell like dinner cooking or laundry detergent. It smelled of expensive perfume and anxiety. It did not take long for me to realize that Lydia did not view Marcus as a partner. To her, he was a renovation project, a rough structure that she needed to strip down and rebuild into something acceptable for high society. She corrected his grammar at the dinner table. She chose his ties. She even dictated which friends he was allowed to keep. I watched my son shrink under her gaze. He was obsessed with the idea of success, blinded by the luxury cars in the driveway and the country club memberships. He believed that if he just changed enough, if he just worked hard enough to mold himself into a Monroe, he would finally be safe. He was wrong. He was drowning, and every time I tried to reach out a hand, he slapped it away. He is just stressed. Evelyn, I told myself as I drove my rusted sedan back to my small house. He is just trying to build a future. But the requests from Lydia started coming, and they were subtle at first, wrapped in fake politeness. She would call me and ask if I could stay away for a weekend because they were hosting important investors. She asked me not to call the house line during dinner hours. I swallowed my pride. I nodded. I agreed. I did it all because I wanted Marcus to have the life I never could give him. I thought my silence was a gift, but it was actually permission for them to treat me like a nuisance. The breaking point of my denial came on a Tuesday afternoon. I had driven over to drop off a box of Marcus's old baseball trophies that I had found in the attic, thinking he might want them for his office. I was wearing my comfortable grey cardigan, the one with the small mend on the sleeve, where I had snagged it on a door handle years ago. I rang the doorbell, and when Lydia answered, her eyes immediately darted to the patch on my sweater. She did not invite me in. She stepped out onto the porch, closing the massive oak door behind her, as if she were afraid I would contaminate the foyer. "Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet tone she used when she was about to be cruel. "It is so sweet of you to come by. But we have neighbours. Important neighbours? I clutched the box of trophies tighter against my chest. I just wanted to give these to Marcus. I know. She sighed, brushing a speck of invisible dust from her shoulder. But look at you. You really cannot come to Ridgeford Hills dressed like that. It reflects poorly on Marcus. He is trying to make partner, and having his mother look like a beggar on the doorstep. It is just not helpful. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked past her, hoping to see Marcus, hoping my son would step out and defend me. And then I saw him. He was standing by the window in the living room, watching. He saw his wife shaming his mother on the doorstep, and he did nothing. He turned his back and walked away. The door opened again, and Lydia smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. "Next time," she said, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Call first, and please. Try to look presentable." She shut the door in my face. I stood there for a long time, staring at the polished wood, the cold wind biting through the cardigan that had kept me warm for 5 years. That was the moment the fear set in. This was not just snobbery. This was an erasure. They were not just ashamed of my poverty. They were actively trying to scrub me out of the picture. And my son, the boy who used to promise to protect me, was letting them hold the eraser. The golden veneer of the Monroe family began to crack, not with a loud shatter, but with the quiet, sickening sound of desperate whispers behind closed doors. To the outside world, Richard and Cynthia Monroe were pillars of the Ridgeford Hills community, driving imported cars and hosting charity galas. But I had spent 30 years cleaning up other people's messes, and I knew the smell of panic when I encountered it. I noticed the way Richard's hand shook when he poured his brandy. I saw the stacks of unopened mail that Lydia quickly swept into a drawer whenever I walked into the room. They were drowning in debt, living on credit and appearances, but instead of tightening their belts, they looked for a lifeline to drag down with them. That lifeline, unfortunately, was my son. Richard had pulled Marcus into a series of high-yield investments that sounded more like gambling than business. Marcus, eager to prove he belonged at their table, signed check after check, leveraging his own modest savings and taking out loans he could barely afford. He was chasing a mirage of wealth, terrified that if he stopped running, Lydia would realize he was just a janitor's son. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I was sitting in their solarium, a glass room filled with exotic plants that looked as thirsty and neglected as I felt. Lydia sat across from me, sipping iced tea, her smile tight and calculated. "Evelyn," she began, her voice smooth like oil on water. "Marcus and I have been talking about the future, about legacy." I nodded, wary. "That is good to hear." "Lydia, we have a tremendous opportunity with Daddy's new venture," she continued, leaning forward. "But liquidity is a bit tight right now. Marcus wants to buy in, to really secure our place. We were thinking, your house on Elm Street. It is fully paid off, isn't it?" My heart hammered against my ribs. My house. The small, 2-bedroom bungalow I had scrubbed floors for 20 years to pay off. It was my only asset, my only security in a world that had given me nothing for free. "What about my house?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Well," she shrugged, as if suggesting I change my shoes. "It is just dead equity. Evelyn, if you sold it, you could move into a nice condo, something smaller, and the proceeds could go to Marcus, to help him invest. It is an investment in his future." I felt a cold rage rise in my chest. Lydia, that house is my home. I am not selling it. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. That evening, when Marcus came home, the ambush began. He did not ask me how my day was. He did not hug me. He walked straight to where I was standing in the kitchen and threw his keys on the counter. "Lydia says you won't help us," he said, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "She wants me to sell my home." "Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It is all I have. It is just a building." "Mom," he shouted, a vein pulsing in his neck. "I am trying to build a life here. I am trying to be someone, and you are just holding on to that old shack out of spite." "Spite," I whispered. Stunned, I worked double shifts for that shack. I bled for that shack so you could have a roof over your head. You are being selfish. He spat out the word like a curse. You have always been so limited. You don't understand how the world works. You are holding me back because you are jealous. I took a step back, physically struck by his words. The boy who used to save his allowance to buy me birthday cards was gone. In his place stood a desperate man, echoing the poison his wife whispered in his ear. The weeks that followed were a torture of silence and subtle humiliation. I was still invited to Sunday dinners, but only as a prop for Lydia to demonstrate her generosity to a difficult mother-in-law. The table was always set with silver I was terrified to touch. At one such dinner, Lydia laughed lightly while cutting her steak. "Oh, Marcus, did I tell you my mother is buying a vacation home in the Hamptons? It is shame your mother is so attached to her little routine. It must be hard. Evelyn, being so afraid of change." I looked down at my plate. "I am not afraid of change. Lydia, I am afraid of foolishness." Richard Monroe slammed his glass down. Marcus looked at me, his face burning with embarrassment. He did not defend me. He did not tell his father-in-law to show respect. Instead, he looked at me with pure exhaustion, as if my dignity was a chore he had to manage. "Mom," he groaned, rubbing his temples. "Please, just stop. Sometimes you make things harder for everyone." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the stranger he had become. He chose their lies over my truth. And in that moment, the last thread of hope that he would come back to me snapped. The conversation that exiled me from my own life did not happen with a shout, but with a whimper. It was a Tuesday evening, the sky outside a bruised purple, when Marcus sat me down at the small kitchen table I had bought at a flea market 10 years ago. He refused to look at me, his eyes fixed on a scratch in the wood, as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. "Mum, we think it might be best if you stayed somewhere else for a little while," he said, his voice cracking on the last few words. "Just for a few weeks. The Monroes are going through a hard time, and Lydia feels like there is too much tension in the house. We just need some space to figure things out." I felt a physical blow to my chest, an ache that started in my heart and radiated out to my fingertips. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until the sun I raised fell back into place. But I looked at his slumped shoulders, the dark circles under his eyes, and the sheer desperation etched into his face. I saw a man who was drowning, and even though he was the one holding my head underwater, my instinct was still to save him. If that is what helps you. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I will go." I packed a bag. I took my essentials, a few changes of clothes, and one item I could not bear to leave behind: a small, faded denim jacket Marcus had worn when he was 6 years old. It was a foolish thing to keep, frayed at the cuffs and missing a button. But it was the only tangible proof I had left that he had once been mine. I checked into the Budget Inn, room 204. It was a place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. The carpet was sticky. The air conditioner rattled like a dying engine, and the view outside the window was a grey expanse of highway. I sat on the bed for hours, staring at the silent phone in my hand, waiting for a message that would tell me this was a mistake. I waited for Marcus to call and say he missed me, that he was sorry, that he was coming to pick me up. Instead, I got a text message from Lydia. "I hope you are using this time to reflect on your attitude. It is very draining for Marcus to constantly mediate between us. Please do not contact him for a few days so he can focus on his work." I read the words over and over until they blurred. There was no kindness in them, no acknowledgement that I was a mother sleeping in a roadside motel so her princess could have space. There was only cruelty. The nights were the hardest. I barely slept. I would curl up on the lumpy mattress, clutching that tiny denim jacket to my chest, inhaling the scent of old fabric and memory. I remembered the day I bought it for him. I had saved my tip money for 3 weeks. When I gave it to him, he had put it on and spun around in circles, laughing. "Look, Mum, I look like a superhero," he had shouted. "You are my superhero." I had told him. Now, that superhero was ghosting me. 3 days passed, then 4. Marcus did not call. He did not text. The silence was louder than the highway traffic outside. It gnawed at my sanity, making me question my own worth. Was I really such a burden? Had I really been so terrible that I deserved this isolation? Then came the morning of the 5th day. I went down to the front desk to ask for extra towels. The clerk, a tired young man with a name tag that read, Steve, looked at me with a sympathetic grimace. "Mrs. Hart," he said, tapping on his keyboard. "I just wanted to remind you that the payment for the first week is due tomorrow. Since there is no card on file for the incidentals or the room charge, will you be paying cash again?" I froze. "Excuse me. My son. Surely my son put his card down for the room." Steve shook his head. "No, ma'am. The reservation is in your name. Payment is due upon checkout or weekly renewal." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I walked back to my room, my legs feeling like lead. They had not just sent me away, they had discarded me. Marcus, who drove a car worth $60,000, had sent his mother to a cheap motel and left her to foot the bill. It was not about space. It was not about tension. It was about erasure. They were banking on my silence, on my habitual self-sacrifice. They assumed Evelyn Hart would just fade away quietly, paying for her own exile with her meagre pension, too ashamed to make a scene. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the phone again. The sorrow that had been drowning me for days began to recede, replaced by something colder, sharper. It was the clarity of a woman who finally realizes that the hand she is holding is the one holding the knife. I was done being the victim. I was done being the mother who suffered in silence. If they wanted me out of the picture, they were going to have to look me in the eye when they did it. I was just about to head to the vending machine for a bottle of water when I heard the click of high heels on the linoleum outside my door. It was a sharp, aggressive sound that did not belong in the Budget Inn. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Then came the voice, muffled but unmistakable. It was Lydia. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door. She was pacing back and forth in the corridor, speaking into her phone with a frantic energy I had never heard from her before. "Daddy, you have to calm down," she hissed. I handled it. Yes, I handled her. She is here, in this dump. She won't be coming back to the house anytime soon. We have the space we need to clear out the files before the auditors get there tomorrow. My heart stopped. Auditors' files. I held my breath, terrified that the floorboards beneath my feet might creak and give me away. Marcus is keeping his mouth shut. Lydia continued, her voice dropping lower. He knows what is at stake. If the SEC finds out about the diversion of funds from the charity account. Yes. I know that is why I told you to use the secondary account. Look, as long as the old woman is not there to answer the phone or open the mail, we can intercept the notices. She is the weak link. Daddy, if she finds out we used her name. Okay. I have to go. I just dropped off an envelope of cash at the front desk to keep her quiet. I am leaving now. The sound of her heels faded down the hall, followed by the heavy thud of the exit door. I stood there in the silence, my blood running cold. They had not sent me away because I was annoying. They had sent me away because I was a liability. I waited 5 minutes to make sure she was truly gone. Then I scrambled to my purse. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my flip phone. I needed information. Lydia had mentioned intercepting notices and using my name. My mind raced back to a piece of mail I had seen on the kitchen counter a week ago, a letter from First National Bank that Marcus had snatched away, claiming it was junk mail. I dialed the number for First National Bank, a number I knew by heart because it was where I had kept my small savings account for 30 years. I navigated through the automated system, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Finally, a human voice answered. "This is Sarah. How can I help you today?" "Hello, Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I felt like I was going to vomit. "This is Evelyn Hart. I am calling to check on the status of a loan. I believe there might be an issue with the paperwork." "One moment. Mrs. Hart. Let me pull up your file based on the number you are calling from. Can you verify your social security number?" I gave her the numbers. There was a long pause, the sound of typing clicking in my ear. "Okay, Mrs. Hart," Sarah said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "I see the account here. You are listed as the primary guarantor for the business expansion loan for Monroe Ventures, taken out 3 months ago. The current outstanding balance is $250,000. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the dresser to keep from falling. $250,000, I stammered. And I am the guarantor, yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "Your signature is on the promissory note. However, we have been trying to reach you. The last 3 payments were returned for insufficient funds, and the account is currently in default. If the payment is not brought current by Friday, the bank will move to seize the collateral listed." "Collateral?" I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "What collateral?" "The property at 429 Elm Street," Sarah said gently. "My house. They had forged my signature. They had stolen my identity to take out a loan for $250,000. And now they were going to lose my home. And Marcus knew. He had stood there and watched me pack my bag. He had let me walk out the door, knowing his wife and father-in-law had signed my life away. I hung up the phone. The shock evaporated, replaced by a heat I had not felt in years. It was the white-hot rage of a woman who had nothing left to lose. I was not a mother anymore. I was a victim of a crime. And the perpetrators were eating dinner in a mansion paid for with my stolen security. I did not cry. I did not sit down. I grabbed my suitcase and threw the few clothes I had unpacked back inside. I zipped it shut with a violent yank. I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. The tired, sad woman from the night before was gone. In her place was someone dangerous. "You want space," I said to the empty room. "I will give you a show." I walked out of the hotel room and into the night. I was going back to Ridgeford Hills. I was going to walk through those front doors, and I was going to burn their house of cards to the ground. The front door of the Monroe estate was unlocked, which was fitting because the people inside were too busy tearing each other apart to worry about security. I could hear the screaming from the driveway. It was not the polite, passive-aggressive bickering I was used to during Sunday dinners. This was raw, unfiltered panic. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped into the foyer. The sound of my arrival was swallowed by the shouting coming from the library. I walked toward the voices, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold, rhythmic determination. I stopped just outside the library archway, hidden by the shadows, and listened. "You said you had it handled." Lydia's voice was a shriek that tore through the expensive acoustics of the room. The bank called. "Marcus. The auditor is flagging the account because the guarantor's signature does not match the previous records. You were supposed to keep her quiet." "I did what you asked," Marcus shouted back, his voice thick with desperation. "I sent her to the hotel. I told her we needed space. What more do you want from me? I want the money to stay in the account." "You idiot." Richard Monroe's voice boomed, deep and menacing. "If the SEC looks at that loan, they will see the transfer to the offshore shell, and I am not going to prison for this. You signed the initial application. Boy, if the old lady talks, you are the one going down for fraud." "Me." Marcus sounded like he was choking. "You told me it was standard procedure. You told me it was a bridge loan. It does not matter what I told you." Richard sneered. "It matters whose name is on the line next to hers." I stepped into the light. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and loud enough to cut through the chaos, "it matters that I never signed anything." The silence that fell over the room was instant and absolute. The three of them froze like statues. Lydia was standing by the fireplace, her face flushed red. Richard was gripping a glass of whiskey so hard his knuckles were white. And Marcus looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. "Mom," he whispered, his face draining of colour. What are you doing here?" "I am here to tell you that I just got off the phone with the bank," I said, walking further into the room until I was standing in the centre of the Persian rug. "They told me about the loan. $250,000 against my house. My house. Marcus. The one I scrubbed floors for 30 years to buy." Marcus blinked, looking from me to Lydia. But Lydia said you agreed. She said she talked to you last month, and you signed the papers because you wanted to help us. She said you were just complaining about it later because you wanted attention." I looked at my son, and for the first time, I saw the depth of his stupidity. He was not just cruel. He was a fool who had let himself be played. "I never signed a thing," I said, looking straight at Lydia. "She forged my signature." Lydia let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She tossed her hair back, regaining her composure with terrifying speed. "Oh, please. Who are they going to believe? Evelyn Us, the Monroes, or a retired cleaning lady who is clearly going senile? We will just say you signed it and forgot. It happens to people your age all the time. You are going to prison, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I am going to the police station from here. I am reporting the identity theft, and I am reporting the fraud. Richard stepped forward, his massive frame looming over me. The smell of alcohol on his breath was overpowering. You listen to me, you ungrateful hag. You walk out that door and go to the police, and I will bury you in legal fees so deep you will never see the sun again. You have no proof. It is your word against 3, and Marcus will back us up, won't you? Marcus Richard turned his glare on my son. Marcus looked at me, his eyes filling with tears, trembling like a child. He was trapped. I, Marcus stammered. He does not need to back you up, I said, reaching into my pocket, because I have all the proof I need. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. What is that? Lydia snapped, her eyes narrowing. I was standing outside my hotel room door this afternoon, I said, staring her down. When you were pacing in the hallway, screaming at your father on the phone. You were so loud. Lydia, you were so confident. I pressed play. The volume was turned all the way up. Lydia's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the library. We forged her name. She is the weak link. Daddy. If she finds out we used her name. I just dropped off an envelope of cash at the front desk to keep her quiet. The recording ended. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece. Lydia's face went from red to a sickly shade of grey. Richard slumped back against the desk, the glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. You, Lydia whispered, her voice trembling with genuine terror. You recorded me. I am not the weak link. Lydia, I said, putting the phone back in my pocket. I am the mother who just realized she raised a son who would let you sell her soul for a country club membership. And now, I am the woman who is going to burn this whole house down. The silence in the library did not last long. It was broken by the wail of sirens cutting through the quiet night of Ridgeford Hills. I had called the police the moment I stepped out of the hotel, even before I walked through the Monroes' front door. I knew that confrontation alone would not save me. I needed the law. When the blue and red lights began to flash against the expensive silk curtains, the atmosphere in the room shifted from shock to absolute chaos. 3 uniformed officers and 2 detectives in plain clothes marched into the foyer. I walked out to meet them, my phone still tight in my hand, while Richard and Lydia remained frozen near the fireplace. This is the recording, I told the lead detective, a stern man with greying hair. And I have the loan documents here that prove my signature was forged. Richard Monroe tried to muster his usual arrogance. He stepped forward, smoothing his suit jacket, though his hands were shaking violently. Officers, this is a misunderstanding. Richard boomed, though his voice lacked its usual command. This woman is confused. She is senile. We were just discussing a family matter. It is not a family matter when you steal $250,000 using my identity, I said clearly. The detective listened to the recording. I watched his face harden as Lydia's voice confessed to the crime on the tape. He looked up at Richard, then at Lydia, and finally at Marcus, who was standing in the corner, looking like a man who had just watched his entire world dissolve into ash. Richard Monroe, You are under arrest for financial fraud, forgery, and identity theft, the detective announced. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest noise I had ever heard. It was the sound of a guillotine dropping. That was when Lydia snapped. The ice princess melted into a puddle of frantic, ugly desperation. She looked at her father in handcuffs. Then she looked at the police. And finally, she turned her predatory gaze on my son. It was him, Lydia shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Marcus. It was Marcus. He brought the papers to me. He told me his mother signed them. I didn't know. I thought it was legal. He tricked us. Marcus stumbled back as if she had slapped him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the woman he had worshipped, the woman he had sold his soul to please, and he saw her for what she truly was. She was not his partner. She was a parasite who would consume him to save herself. Lydia. Marcus breathed out, his voice barely a whisper. You knew. You told me to bring the papers. You told me it was just a formality. Liar. Lydia screamed, her face twisted and ugly. Officer! Arrest him! He is the one who wanted the money. He is a nobody who wanted to be rich. The detective ignored her outbursts. Ma'am? We have the recording. We have the paper trail. We know about the shell companies. He gestured to another officer. Lydia Monroe, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. As the officer grabbed her wrists, Lydia's fight drained out of her. She looked at Marcus, her eyes suddenly wide and pleading, switching tactics in a heartbeat. Marcus, baby, please, she sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Tell them it was a mistake. Don't let them take me. I love you. Marcus, please. She reached out for him with her cuffed hands. Marcus stared at her. For years, he had craved her touch. He had lived for her approval. But now, he looked at her hands and saw only chains. He took a slow, deliberate step backward. You don't love me, Marcus said, his voice hollow and dead. You never loved me. I was just a credit score to you. I was just a scapegoat waiting to happen. Take them away, the detective ordered. As they dragged Richard and Lydia out the front door, another officer approached with a clipboard. He informed us that due to the severity of the federal investigation into Richard's assets, the house was being seized as part of the crime scene. The assets were frozen effective immediately. The Monroes were not just arrested. They were ruined. The house fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a tomb. Marcus stood in the center of the library, surrounded by the luxury he had sacrificed his mother to obtain. He looked around at the leather books, the mahogany desk, the crystal chandelier. It was all fake. It was all a trap. He fell to his knees. It was a slow, agonizing collapse. Like a building whose foundation had finally given way. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed. It was the deep, guttural sound of a man mourning his own life. I stood by the doorway. I did not go to him. I did not rush to comfort him. The mother in me wanted to, but the woman I had become knew better. I watched him cry for the wife who hated him and the life that never existed. I had not won. There are no winners in a war like this. But as I stood there, clutching my old purse, I realized I was the only one standing. I was the only one who was real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The police lights outside continued to flash, painting the library walls in a rhythmic, nauseating wash of red and blue. The house was now a crime scene. But for a moment, the officers gave us space. Marcus was still on his knees on the Persian rug, his expensive suit crumpled, his tie undone like a noose he had finally slipped out of. He looked small. He looked like the child who used to scrape his knees on the pavement, only this time, a bandage and a kiss would not fix the damage. He crawled toward me, not daring to stand, and reached out to grasp the hem of my coat. His hands were shaking violently. Mum, I am so sorry. He choked out, the words wet with tears. I was so blind. I didn't see it. I swear to God, I didn't see it. They told me I was part of the family. They told me I was smart, that I was saving them. I looked down at him. My heart twisted in my chest, a physical ache that I had known since the day he was born. I wanted to reach down, brush the hair from his forehead, and tell him it was going to be all right. That was my instinct. That was what I had done for 30 years. But my hands remained in my pockets. I could not move them. The betrayal was too fresh, the wound too deep. He had not just made a mistake. He had actively participated in my erasure. You saw enough? Marcus, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You saw them treat me like dirt. You saw them lock me out. And you said nothing. I was ashamed, he confessed, his voice breaking into a sob that racked his entire body. I was ashamed. Not of you. I was ashamed of me. I wanted to belong here so badly. Every time Lydia looked at me, I felt like I had to prove I wasn't just the janitor's son. I thought if I hid you, if I pushed you away, they would finally accept me. He pressed his forehead against my shoes, weeping like a man who had lost his soul. I am so sorry. Please. Mom, tell me how to fix this. I looked at the top of his head. I loved him. I would always love him. But forgiveness is not a switch you can flip, especially when the person asking for it is the same one who handed you a hotel key and told you to disappear. Marcus, I said softly. He looked up, his face a ruin of snot and tears. I raised a good boy, but a lost man. He froze, the weight of the words crushing him. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to promise he would change. But I turned my head away. I had nothing left to say to him in that house. Hours later, the scene shifted to the harsh, sterile, fluorescent lights of the police precinct. The air smelled of stale coffee and floor wax, a scent I knew too well. Richard and Lydia were being processed in separate rooms, but their high-priced family lawyer had arrived with lightning speed. He came out to the waiting area where Marcus sat on a plastic bench, his head in his hands. I stood by the vending machine, watching. The lawyer did not offer condolences. He did not offer help. He walked straight to Marcus and slapped a folder onto the table. Mr. Hart, the lawyer said, his tone clipped and professional. My clients have instructed me to present this to you immediately. In light of the misunderstandings regarding the finances, and to protect the remaining assets from being frozen due to marital association, Lydia is requesting an immediate, uncontested divorce. Marcus looked up, blinking slowly. Divorce? She is in handcuffs, and she wants a divorce. It is a strategic necessity, the lawyer replied coldly, and an emotional one. The family feels that your lack of discretion has caused this situation. If you sign now, they will agree not to drag you into the fraud charges as a co-conspirator. They will claim you were an unwitting pawn. It is a generous offer. I watched the realization wash over my son. Even now, at their lowest point, The Monroes were cutting off the dead weight. They were not apologizing for ruining his credit or stealing his mother's identity. They were apologizing for getting caught, and they were discarding him to save whatever pennies they had left. Marcus looked at the papers, then at the lawyer, and finally across the room at me. He looked for a sign. He looked for his mother to step in and fight this battle for him. But I stayed by the vending machine. I did not move. I did not nod. This was the bed he had made, the sheets spun from gold and lies. He had to be the one to lie in it. He had to be the one to pick up the pen and sign the end of his delusions. Marcus looked back at the papers. His hand trembled as he reached for the pen. He was alone. And for the first time in his life, he finally understood that being alone was the only way he was ever going to find himself. It has been 30 days since the flashing lights faded from the driveway of the Monroe estate, and the silence that followed has been the loudest thing I have ever heard. Marcus moved out of that marble mausoleum the next morning. He did not fight for a settlement. He did not ask for alimony. He took his clothes, his car, and the little bit of dignity he had managed to salvage from the wreckage, and he rented a studio apartment on the south side of town. It is a small place, barely 400 square feet, with a view of a brick wall instead of a manicured garden. But for the first time in years, the roof over his head belongs to him. He found a job within a week. It is nothing glamorous, just a mid-level administrative role at a logistics firm, far removed from the high-stakes financial gambling Richard Monroe had dragged him into. He also started seeing a therapist, a woman who specializes in narcissistic abuse and family enmeshment. He told me in a letter that the first session consisted mostly of him sitting in a chair and crying for 45 minutes. As for me, I went back to my bungalow on Elm Street. The bank fraud investigation is ongoing, but with Lydia's confession on tape, my name was cleared within 48 hours. I did not go back to sitting alone in my house, waiting for the phone to ring. I started volunteering 3 days a week at the Oak Creek nursing home. I spend my afternoons reading to people who have no one else to visit them. There is something healing about holding a hand that is frailer than your own. It reminds you that time is the only currency that truly matters. Marcus and I have not seen each other since that night at the police station. I established a boundary, a line in the sand that I told him he could not cross until he understood why it was there. We do not talk on the phone. Instead, he writes me letters. Every Friday. An envelope arrives in my mailbox. In the beginning, the letters were frantic apologies, pages stained with ink where his hand had rested too long. But lately, the tone has changed. He writes about his therapy. He writes about learning to cook for one person. He writes about the shame that wakes him up at 3 a.m. and the slow, painful process of forgiving himself. I read every single one of them. I keep them in a shoebox on my dresser. But I do not reply. Not yet. I needed to know that his change was not a performance for my benefit. I needed to know he could stand on his own 2 feet without using me as a crutch. Yesterday afternoon, the air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of burning leaves and coming winter. The mail carrier dropped a thicker envelope than usual into my slot. I carried it to the kitchen table and made myself a cup of tea before opening it. Inside, there was no long letter. There was just a single sheet of lined paper and a photocopy of a legal document. It was the divorce decree, finalized, signed. He had not contested a single thing. He had walked away with nothing but his name. On the note, he had written just 2 sentences. I am rebuilding the man you raised. Mom, I hope one day he is good enough to introduce to you. I ran my thumb over the handwriting. It was steadier now. I looked out the window at the maple tree in my front yard, its leaves a brilliant, defiant red against the grey sky. I realized that my anger had finally cooled, leaving behind a quiet resolve. I was not ready to go back to how things were. I would never go back to being the doormat, the silent supporter, the mother who gives until she is hollow. But I was ready to meet this new man my son was becoming. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice tentative. "Mom, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Meet me at the diner on 4th Street on Sunday, 10 o'clock. You pay for your own coffee." There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a shaky exhale. I will be there. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I replied. "We are starting over. Marcus. And this time, you earn your place at the table." I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, watching the leaves fall one by one. I had lost the boy I raised. But perhaps, if we were both willing to do the work, I would gain the man he was always meant to be. Thank you so much for tuning in to this story and walking this emotional journey with Evelyn and Marcus. I would love to hear your thoughts. Where are you listening from right now? And do you think Evelyn did the right thing by making Marcus wait? Let's chat in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.